Okay,
Sharia said,
perfect.
thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
She tried
So,
to come on to see.
Bezrat Hashem, next week, it's going to be the week of Passover. Passover, it's a very special time this year. It's on Motzai Shabbat. And we in the diaspora, we have almost 3 days that we are engaged with what is truly important in life. We have 3 days. We have Shabbat, Sunday, and Monday that we are completely immersed in the connection, our connection and relationship with Hashem. But of course, the most important part of all of it is Leila Seder. Now, Leila Seder, if there is one thing which is true about Leila Seder, is that there is no any Seder in Leila Seder. Right? Seder, Seder in Hebrew means that it's organized. But show me when was the last time you had a night, on the night of the Seder, Passover night, which was organized. There's always mess. People forget this, he forgot that. The kids spill the wine and he breaks the matzah. There's always so much mess. And the person who reads the Agada all of a sudden remember that he missed and he skipped a part. Everything is there except of Seder. So I heard once a good line saying, so if so, why do we call this evening the night of Seder, the night of organized?
Exactly.
So much mess. So the answer is that exactly the point of that night. The point of this night is to show us that although what you are able to see with your vision is only a mess, but there's a lot of seder, there's a lot of organization behind all of it. And Hashem is running the show. And this is exactly what happened to the Jews. The Jews have been in Egypt for 86 years under extreme condition and extreme suffering and extreme slavery and all the worst thing that you can imagine. But nevertheless, Hashem wanted to show them that I'm running the show. There is seder, there is reason, and there is seder behind all of it. So today, we're going to speak about Leila Seder. We're going to overview a little bit of what we do, what we have on the Seder plate. And we're going to see something very, very interesting, which is an argument. Of course, in Judaism, we have to have arguments, but an argument between the Rambam and the Ravid. So the Rambam, it's one of the most famous Jewish scholars. At the same time, after the Rambam published his book, there was another great sage by the name of the Ravid. His initials of his name is the Ravid, and he wrote a commentary. Not a commentary, but he wrote his notes on the Rambam himself. And many times he disagrees with the Rambam. And he typically uses very harsh words. He has a very unique way of answering to the Rambam. And it's in most of the editions of the Rambam, it's printed on the Rambam himself. So we're going to see that they have an argument on one of the minagim, one of the traditions and behaviors of the Seder night. And we're going to see what's the root cause of what's the difference in their opinions. And it's going to lead us to a very interesting conclusion. But more than interesting, I think it's a very inspiring lesson. And that is super in time because next week, aside of Passover, of course, we're going to have the 11th of Nisan, the Rebbe's birthday. And if you want one of the main themes that the Rebbe brought to us, to his followers, it's exactly that point that we're going to try and extract out of this class. So let me share the screen. I see Dr. Chen is with us. So somebody, we have a doctor who can take care of the class. And okay, can you see it? Let me
It's starting. Yes, we can see your screen now.
Okay, perfect. Let me start this slideshow. And but just before, as I mentioned, we just received the matzah. And those of you who are in Mumbai and they are in needs of a place for the Seder, of course, you're more than welcome to join us. And if you do the Seder at your home and you just need a matzah, so please reach out to me or to Chaya, and we'll do everything we can to have you covered. Okay, so Charoset, we're going to discuss today Charoset. Are we doing the Seder, the matzah, we eat the matzah with Charoset or without Charoset? But let's first see what the story is all about. So we'll start with the matzah. Why do we eat matzah in the night of Passover? Who knows, by the way? Who can think of a reason why do we eat matzah?
I think, can I answer?
Yes.
I think it was the bread that they made in a hurry with no time for it to raise. And it was a flat bread. And it's to commemorate their hurry with this bread.
Okay.
That's
So that's one reason. But soon we're going to see that the matzah itself has two reasons as to why do we eat the matzah on the night of Passover. So we'll start with source number one. And this is the beginning, how we start. That's the beginning phrase of the night of Passover, of the Agadah. Okay, Chenji, please, source number one.
Remembering exile. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Whoever is hungry, come, eat with us. Whoever is needy, come, join our Passover Seder.
Okay, so what is it? That's the bread
of affliction.
Of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. So first thing is, this was the special chapati that the Jews were eating in Egypt. They were slaves. Slaves don't have enough money to buy, all sorts of sourdough and yeast to allow the bread to rise and add any additives. They just eat whatever comes their way. So it's to remember our times in Egypt. But then come a second reason. And this is again from Passover Agadah. Before we eat the matzah, we explain why do we eat the matzah. So what is it? What's the answer?
Remembering the redemption. This matzah that we eat, what's it all about? Because the dough of our ancestors did not have time to become leavened before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and redeemed them. As it is said, they baked matzah cakes from the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, because it was not leavened, for they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, and they had also not prepared any other provisions.
Yeah. So what do we remember? We remember that our bread didn't have time to rise. Why? Because God has taken us out of Egypt in a hurry. So what is the flat bread? That we will remember the redemption. So the first reason we explained was to remember the bread that we were eating in Egypt. The second reason is to remember the redemption, that our bread had no time to rise because God has took us out of Egypt. Okay? And we can see it also in the Torah. The Torah itself, so the two sources we have had just now was from the Agadah. Now we're going to see that the Torah itself mentioned these two reasons. Why do we eat the matzah? Let's see. Source number 2, with Rashi's explanation. Yes.
You shall not eat leaven with it. For 7 days you shall eat it with matzot, the bread of affliction. For in haste you went out of the land of Egypt, so that you shall remember the day when you went out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life. Rashi. bread of affliction, bread that recalls the suffering in Egypt. In haste you went out, and the dough wasn't able to rise. The matzah
Wasn't.
reminds us of this. This haste wasn't ours, but the haste of the Egyptian to drive us out of Egypt.
Yeah. So we see that from the Torah itself, we can extract these two reasoning, and there are two extreme, right? There are two extreme reasoning. One is the reason of affliction, okay, which is a bad reason, bad memories. But the other one is exactly the opposite, that God, when God they redeemed us out of Egypt, he didn't allow us to stay there even for 1 minute. He wanted us out of Egypt. So that's to remind us the redemption. And these are the two. So this is matzah. Why do we eat maror on the night of Passover, on the night of the Seder?
Bitterness.
And that's easy, right?
Bitterness.
Maror, it's very easy. There's only one reason why do we eat maror. Let's see it inside. Yeah.
Why do we eat maror? On this night they shall eat the flesh roasted over the fire, and matzot with bitter herbs they shall eat it.
So this is what the Torah says. What do you do on the night of Passover? Okay, you eat the flesh, which is the offering, the Passover offering, roasted over fire. The Passover offering had a very specific way that it needed to be made, and it was not allowed to be cooked, only roast directly over fire. Nothing of it was allowed to be cooked. All part of it was only to be roasted, like barbecued. And you eat it together with the matzah. So you take like in shawarma, you know, you take the matzah. Remember those days matzah weren't the fragile matzah we eat today. It was a soft matzah, like chapati, okay? Like pita. So you take this matzah, you put the bread inside, the offering of Passover, you put it inside. And then the Torah also says with bitter herbs you should eat it, and then you eat them all together. But the Torah doesn't reason why do we need to eat the bitter herbs. And this come the Talmud, and Rabbi Ishmael says in the Talmud, but here we have a quote from the Agada, yes. So, sorry, Rabban Gamliel explains, yes, why do we eat the maror?
This maror that we eat, what's it all about? Because the Egyptians embittered our ancestors' life in Egypt. As it is said, they made their lives bitter with hard service, with mortar and with bricks, and with all manners of service in the field, all their service which they made them serve with rigor. Okay. So to remember this, in the night of Passover, in the night of freedom, we eat those bitter herbs that remind us of the tough times. But then we have, in addition, we have few more things that we have on the Seder plate. And now come the top of our today's discussion, which is the Charoset. Okay. Let's see what's the story in the Charoset, because Charoset is not mentioned in the Torah. So where does Charoset come from? So let's see how Maimonides explain the history of Charoset. How do you make it and what do you do with it? That's from the laws of Chametz on Matzah, where the Maimonides, the Rambam, explain in length how do you perform the night of Passover. Let's see inside. The Charoset is a mitzvah ordained by the sages to commemorate the clay with which our forefathers worked in Egypt. How is it made? We take dates, dried figs, raisins, or similar fruits, crush them, add vinegar, and mix them with spices, just as clay is mixed with straw. This is placed on the table on the first 2 nights of Passover. Yeah. So it's part of the Passover plate, the Seder plate. What do we do with it? So the Maimonides continues to say, what do we do with it? Next, we wrap matzah and maror together as one, dip them in charoset, and recite the blessing. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us regarding the eating of matzah and bitter herbs. Then we eat them. Afterwards, we recite the blessing. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us regarding the eating of the sacrifice. We first partake of the meat of the Chagiga offering of the 14th of Nisan.
Yes. The Chagiga is a different, in addition to the offering of Passover. Every festival we also eat. Every festival we have a mitzvah, we have a commandment to bring offering in addition. Okay, so on the night of Passover, in addition to the offering of Passover, which everybody had mandatory to eat a certain part of it, we also have a mandatory to eat from the Chagiga offering. But then what do we do at present? And what is the problem at present? At present, we don't have this lafa. We don't do this combo. Why do we don't have this combo? Because we don't have, what are we missing today? From all the ingredients of the sandwich that we just mentioned before, we are missing the main part, which is the Passover offering. We do not have in our days, since we don't have Bet HaMikdash, so we don't have the Passover offering. So what do we do at present? So Maimonides continues.
At present, when there is no Paschal sacrifice, after reciting the blessing Hamotzi Lechem, we recite the blessing Al Akilat Matzah, dip the matzah in Charoset and eat it.
Yeah. So you take the matzah. So before, at the time, I'm going one slide back, okay? You wrap the matzah and maror together at one and dip in Charoset, okay? Then you eat the matzah, maror, and the Passover offering, you dip it in Charoset. What do we do in our times when we don't have the sandwich? We don't have it together. Why? Because we don't have the Passover offering. Saying the Rambam, you just take the matzah, you say the special blessing of achilat matzah, to eat the matzah. You dip the matzah itself alone with the charoset, and you eat it. Is it something you're doing, by the way? Anybody over here, this is what is doing with the charoset?
We do.
What do we do with the charoset?
How do we make the charoset?
No, what do you dip what do you use the charoset
With the
for?
matzah, we put first with matzah, we eat with charoset. And then after that, we have also matzah with the lettuce, maror,
Yes.
with charoset.
That's fine. But do you have just matzah with charoset?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Yes.
yes,
You
we
have-
have.
Yes, Safira, you have
You
just
have
matzah.
lettuce
First you
with
take...
it, lettuce.
No, not lettuce. I'm not talking about lettuce.
Maror.
I'm not talking about taking maror, dipping the maror in the charoset. That's one thing. After you dip the maror in the charoset, you make the sandwich, Hillel sandwich, okay? Which is you take the matzah, you take the maror, and together you dip it in charoset. That's fine.
Yes.
What I'm asking is, has anybody take just the matzah alone by itself and dip it in the charoset?
No.
Yes, we do.
I think we do.
Yeah?
I think
Who is
first
doing?
we begin with matzah with charoset, and then we have the matzah with the charoset and the maror.
Okay. So who said yes we do except of Ruth? Somebody else said yes we do.
Yeah, it's me.
I said,
Yeah? Rachel, this is what do you do?
Yeah. We actually make 3 layers, and we take the matzah from the middle layer, and the last layer we crumple it, put it into this, like it's the date syrup that we make, and then we eat it like
And
one
then
of
and then
the.
you said the blessing and eat it.
Yeah.
Yes. And the
Very
other one we
interesting.
have a leaf, the salad leaf, and wrap it around,
Yeah.
and that is the
Yeah,
second
that's
one.
separate. The salad leaf is
Yeah,
the
that's it.
maror, it's separate. I'm just asking
Yeah.
if the raw matzah, you take just the matzah, dip it in the
Raw.
matzah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what Maimonides says, by the way. This is what, oops, I'm sorry. This is what Maimonides says.
Chilat matzah.
So this is what Maimonides says that you do. You just take the matzah, But here, what we're going to see now is the Ravid, like we just said before. And the Ravid doesn't leave the Maimonides like this. The Ravid has, he argue. What does he argue? Let's see. Khenji, please.
Ravid's sharp critique. Ravid responds to Maimonides' statement in his typically sharp style, writing that there is absolutely no requirement to dip the Matzah in the Charoset. In Ravid's word, this is nonsense. A number of commentators have already pointed out that Maimonides' source is in the writings of the Geonim. As the Tur also cites, the source is the Siddur of Rabbi Amram Gaon, which was written before the time of Maimonides and is referenced by him in several places.
Yeah. This is the Siddur of Rabbi Amram Gaon, which is hundreds of years before Maimonides, and what he says.
After making the Hamotzi blessing, make the blessing on the Matzah, dip in Charoset, and eat.
Okay.
So now, what we have left to understand is why is the Ravid saying and what the Maimonides says, this is nonsense, right? And why isn't it saying it about Rabbi Amram Gaon? Because Maimonides takes it from an earlier source, much earlier source. And of course, we know that there is something beneath the surface. This argument is not just whether you do A or you don't do A. There is a reason behind what's each one with his reasoning and what's the source of the argument. Okay, so now you're ready to take a deep dive into it, and we'll start to understand. This is the Rebbe's teaching on this argument between the Rambam, who says that we do take the matzah and dip it in the Charoset even in our time, in the time of exile, and the Ravid, who says this is nonsense. Okay, let's see.
Between temple and exile times. An explanation of the debate between Maimonides and the Ravid can be found in Safnat Paneak by the Rogatchover Gaon.
So the Rogatchover Gaon was a person who lived in the beginning of the previous decade. He actually met with the Rebbe, if I'm not mistaken, and he had the correspondence with the Rebbe. He was much older than the Rebbe, but he was the rabbi of the small city called Dvinsk, and he was somebody that you called genius, but in a genius in the terms of the Torah. So he knew all the Torah by heart. Not only he knew all the Torah by heart, but he wrote very, very extensive insights on the Torah. And it's very hard to understand the writing of the Rogatchover because he writes only the initials. It does not spend time to explain what is his ideas, because his ideas were always flowing. So he did not have time to sit down and explain all of it. He just wrote, and in the recent years, there are great Torah scholars who are sitting down and trying to unpack and understand what was the Rogatchover explaining. So, and the Rebbe, our Rebbe, likes his teaching a lot, and he has a very, very unique way of understanding Torah, mostly oral Torah, obviously, and explaining it. So here is an explanation by the Rebbe that it's based on the Rogatchover Gaon, on the argument between Rambam and Ravid. And by the way, we have a glimpse into Jewish customs, okay? Because sometimes we see one community doing something, another community don't do something. I don't have any. Okay, let's take this for example, okay? Somebody is dipping the matzah in Charoset, somebody is not dipping the matzah in Charoset, okay? And you might think to yourself, what's the difference? There's no difference. There's no meaning behind it. And here you see that everything in Judaism, almost everything in Judaism, it's based on so much logic, so much reasoning behind. There's nothing that it just, almost nothing that it just, because of time, the time changed things, people change their behavior. Everything is rooted well into reasoning and explanation. And it's unbelievable to see how every detail of our behavior, right? You start to tie your shoes from the right leg or from the left leg. It has a reason behind it. Not only we do because, do it because why? I don't know why, but there is reasons behind it. And here we have a glimpse. We know some community dip the matzah in Charoset, some communities don't. Rabbi says it's nonsense. Maimonides says do it. And now we will understand why are they arguing, what's behind the scenes. Chenji, please.
The Ragachover explains that Rabbi actually agrees with Maimonides that during the time of the temple, the matzah was dipped in the Charoset. His disagreement is only with Maimonides' ruling that this practice should be followed in the present day as well. Regarding the difference between the time of the temple and the present day in dipping matzah in Charoset.
So first of all, what the Ragachover explains is the Ravet doesn't have any problem with Rav Amram Gaon Siddur, which was hundreds of years ago, who explained what was done in the time of Bet HaMikdash. That's not a problem. His only problem is with Maimonides. Why? Because Maimonides says that even in our time, in the time of exile, where we do not have the Passover offering, you take the raw matzah and dip it in Charoset. He doesn't understand it to the point that they say this is nonsense. Now, what's the difference between the time of the temple and our time in exile, the present day, in dipping the Charoset inside or not dipping the Charoset inside? What's the connection between the temple and our time to the Charoset? So to understand that, let's go to the next slide with the Ragachover explanation.
The Ragachover explains that there are two reasons for the mitzvah to eat. One as a reminder of hardship, the bread of affliction, and the other as a reminder of freedom. For you left Egypt in haste. Maror, however, has only one purpose, as a symbol of slavery. And Charoset also represents slavery, as a reminder of the clay used for bricks. Therefore, during the time of the temple, matzah was certainly dipped in Charoset, even according to Rabbi, since matzah also shares that significance as a reminder of hardship.
Yeah. So we have, in the three things we say that we have in the Seder plates, okay? There are a few more, but we are discussing only these three things today. We have the maror. What is the reason for maror? It's to remember the hardship, right? Charoset, it's to remember the clay that they used for brick. It's also to remember the hardship, the slavery and the hardship. Matzah is the only thing that has two sides to the coin, right? From one end, matzah is to remember the bread of affliction. The other end of it is to remember that we have left Egypt, the redemption from Egypt, that we have left Egypt with haste. So in the time of Bet HaMikdash, that you take the matzah, and even according to the Ravid, you take the matzah and you dip it in the Charoset. Why? Because at the time of Bet HaMikdash, the matzah has a connection to the slavery in Egypt. But after, in our time, the matzah has changed. Let's see it in the words of the Rebbe.
Nowadays, maror isn't biblical. However, in the post-temple era, we see that the mitzvah that serves as a reminder of the slavery is no longer in effect, as maror today is only a rabbinic obligation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Let's see the source of it from the Gemara in Tractate Pesachim. Let's see. Rava says.
Rava said, the mitzvah of matzah today, even after the destruction of the temple, is by Torah law. But the mitzvah to eat bitter herbs is by rabbinic law. The Gemara asks, in what way is the mitzvah of bitter herbs different from that of matzah? The verse states regarding the Paschal lamb, they shall eat it with matzot and bitter herbs. We derive from this that when there is an obligation to eat the paschal lamb, there is likewise a mitzvah to eat bitter herbs. However, when there is no obligation to eat the paschal lamb, there is also no mitzvah to eat bitter herbs.
And
But if
therefore, since we don't have the Paschal lamb, since we don't have the Pesach offering, so we don't eat also bitter herbs, because the Torah combined them together. Right? The Torah combined the Passover offering with the bitter herbs. I do not have the Passover offering, so I don't need the bitter herbs. Then I don't need the bitter herbs too. So immediately the Gemara asks, so why do we have matzah?
But
Because
if so,
the Torah combines matzah too. The Torah combines all three together. We should eat matzah with the Passover offering, with the bitter herbs. Now, since we don't have the Passover offering, therefore you say you don't need bitter herbs, so why do we need matzah? Right in the beginning, you said that matzah, it's an obligation from the Torah, even in our time. So this is what the Gemara asks, and what's the answer?
but if so, the same reasoning should apply to matzah as well, as it is written with matzot and bitter herbs.
Yeah, so matzah and bitter herbs. And since you don't eat bitter herbs, and why we don't eat bitter herbs? Because we don't have the Passover offering, so we shouldn't have matzah too. So what's the answer?
The Gemara rejects this argument. The verse repeats the obligation to eat matzah as it states, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month in the evening, you shall eat matzot. This verse establishes a separate obligation to eat matzah unrelated to the paschal lamb.
True. If the only source, the only commandment to eat matzah was the previous verse where the Torah says that you combine matzah, Passover offering, and maror together and eat them, we would not have an obligation to eat matzah today. And therefore, we don't have an obligation to eat maror today. Why? Because we don't have Passover offering. But why do we have an obligation to eat matzah? Because there is a different, separate verse. There's a separate commandment in the Torah where it says that on the 40th day in the evening, you shall eat matzot. So we have an obligation to eat matzot for this. But what do we come out of the conclusion? That Passover offering we don't eat. So why do we eat then maror? Why do we eat the bitter herbs? If the Torah that says that bitter herbs is related only to the Passover offering, and we don't have the Passover offering, so why do we eat the bitter herbs? Let's see.
Maror as a reminder of the temple, not slavery. The reason the sages enacted a requirement to eat maror and dip in Charoset is to serve as a reminder of the temple.
Wow.
It's not the same maror that we have eaten in Bet HaMikdash. During the time of Bet HaMikdash, why did we ate maror? To remember the slavery. But now, the same maror that we eat is not to remember slavery, because that is outruled since we don't have the Passover offering. So why do we do it today? Our sages made a special an action to have a requirement to eat maror, to remember the time of the temple, that in the time of the temple, we would eat maror in the night of Passover. Let's see it in the word of the Shulchan Aruch Arav. He explains it in a very special way, yes.
The biblical obligation to eat maror is only applicable in temple times. Nowadays, it is a rabbinic commandment enacted by the sages to remember the temple era.
Yeah, we have few such examples where things that we do not, it's not a requirement from the Torah, and nevertheless our sages made it as a commandment today in the time of exile to remember the time of to remember the Bet HaMikdash. For example, during the time of Bet HaMikdash, the lulav and the etrog would be taken only on the first day of Sukkot. And now, how many times we take the lulav and the etrog?
8 days.
8 days.
Every day.
Right.
Why do we do it every day today? It's to remember Bet Hamikdash, because even in the time of Bet Hamikdash, in the good times, outside Bet Hamikdash they would take the lulav one day, but inside Bet Hamikdash they would take the lulav every day. So in order to remember Bet Hamikdash, our sages enacted a special commandment, and the same is true here. We do not need to eat maror today. Why? Because maror is part or that comes together with the Passover lamb, and we don't have the Passover offering today. So why did Chachamim enacted this commandment to eat maror? And don't forget, we say a blessing on it. We dip the maror, and we have a special blessing. We say Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat maror. We say a blessing. What is this for? Not to remember those hard times in Egypt. That commandment doesn't exist anymore until Mashiach comes and we have Passover offering again. So why did Chachamim enacted this commandment? To remember Bet Hamikdash, what we were doing in Bet Hamikdash. So now, since the mitzvah of maror is already a different mitzvah, right? Because now it's not from the same reason of the Torah. So the mitzvah of maror, it's not the same. What about the mitzvah of matzah? Mitzvah of matzah is still there, right? But in the mitzvah of matzah, we have explained that we have two parts for the mitzvah of matzah. One is to remember the affliction, to remember the bad days. And the other part is to remember the redemption, the good days. Which part are those two parts still applicable today? Are they still exist today? So let's see how the Rebbe unpack it.
Why don't we commemorate slavery? The reason why in the present day, the mitzvah associated with remembering slavery is no longer in effect can be understood simply. A reminder of slavery is only relevant when there is no actual slavery. Under such circumstances, a commemoration of the past makes sense. Therefore, during the time of the temple, when there was no state of slavery, there was a need for a reminder of slavery through maror and dipping in Charoset. However, in the present day, since we are in exile, which is itself a state of slavery, there is no need for a reminder of slavery. As of the temple, experience of slavery is felt in reality. For this reason, the mitzvah associated with remembering slavery is no longer in effect, and thus the biblical requirement for maror no longer applies. Instead, the sages instituted it as a commemoration.
It's unbelievable what the Rebbe explains here. There is a complete shift between what was Leil HaSeder, what was these portions of Leil HaSeder in the time of Bet HaMikdash to our time. In the time of Bet HaMikdash, when Jews were, they had a sense of freedom, not just a sense of freedom, they were complete freedom. So then the mitzvah was to remember the exile, was to remember slavery. But now, when we are ourselves, we are in exile, we don't need a reminder of slavery because we are the slavery itself. This is our day to day. We don't need reminders of it. And therefore, because we don't need reminders of it, so our sages, so the mitzvah of maror, bitter herbs, doesn't apply, doesn't exist. So why did Chachamim enacted these commandments of the maror in our times, in the time of exile? It's not to remember slavery, because slavery, you don't need to remind yourself of slavery. You're living slavery. So what do we need to remind ourselves? We need to remind ourselves the customs that Jews were doing in the time of Bet HaMikdash, which is a sense of freedom, not a sense of slavery. So the same mitzvah technically shifted itself completely 180 degrees. You do the same thing. You eat the same bitter herbs. You say the same blessing. In the time 2,000 years ago when you do it, what is the feeling that you should have while eating the bitter herbs? Bad feeling of slavery. When we do it today in 2025, what is the feeling that we have while eating bitter herbs? You know why do I eat it? Because this is what our ancestors did in Bet HaMikdash while they were already in complete freedom. That's a complete shift. Now, after October 7th, right? Last year, this year, we were sitting in the Seder. Do we need to remind ourselves of the slavery of our forefathers in Egypt? No, because we are living it. Everyone sitting uncomfortable in the Seder night because knowing that our brothers and sisters are by the hands of those monsters. We don't need reminders. That's our reality. Therefore, because we do not need the reminders, so all those things that the Torah made in the Seder night that were designed to remind us of slavery, they don't need to exist because we don't need those reminders. So now, what do we take out of it? How is it related to dipping the matzah in the Charoset or not dipping the matzah in the Charoset? So let's see what the Rebbe takes out from it.
Nowadays, maror isn't biblical. Based on the above, the difference between the time of the temple and the present day regarding dipping matzah in Charoset becomes clear. According to the Ravad, during the time of the temple, since matzah also contained an element of slavery, there was reason and necessity to dip matzah in Charoset, which also symbolizes slavery, a reminder of the clay that they worked with in Egypt. However, in the present day, since the mitzvah associated with remembering slavery is no longer in effect, matzah now represents only freedom. As a result, there is no logic for dipping matzah in Charoset, which represents slavery.
You got it. Makes perfect sense. We said maror doesn't have a place today. What's the place for the same maror from the Torah has no place today? Why? Because we don't need to remind ourselves of slavery. So what is the maror of today? The maror of today is a different type of maror. We said in the beginning that matzah has two parts of it. One is bread of affliction, which to remind us of the harsh times in Egypt. And the other part of the matzah is to remember the redemption. The Rebbe is saying the part of the matzah which is connected with slavery only existed in the time of the temple. But today, in exile, we don't need that part of the matzah. We don't need to eat matzah to remember those bad days in Egypt because we are living these bad days. So therefore, in the time of Bet HaMikdash, we needed to dip matzah and charoset because they were from the same family. Matzah is to remember the bread of affliction, and charoset is to remember the clay that they have enforced us to create. So you connect the two together. You dip the matzah and the clay. You dip the bread of affliction with the clay that you made there. But in our days, claiming derived, in our days, that part, the part of the bread of affliction in the matzah doesn't exist anymore. I don't need to remember the bread of affliction because I live affliction right now. Therefore, saying derived, what's the point of dipping matzah, which is there today only to remind us of redemption, not the other way, to dip it in the charoset? Why do we need to do it? It makes no sense. So then we will ask ourselves, and the Rebbe soon will answer, so why does the Rambam say that yes, you take the matzah which is a bread of freedom, and you dip it in the Charoset. But before we go to the Rambam, everybody understood the Raavad? Why does the Raavad say we shouldn't dip the matzah in the Charoset? Everybody understood,
Yes,
or I need to?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Rabbi.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Because it's such a shift. So I want to
Yeah.
make sure everybody gets it. Now,
Right.
if so, why does Maimonides holds that we need to take the matzah and dip it in the Charoset if the whole point of matzah is a bread of redemption? So let's see how the Rebbe explains it.
However, Maimonides maintains that even in the current era, we should dip matzah in Charoset.
Why?
Rabbi's reason-
One second. Why? Because Maimonides says that the same way that we have maror, we eat maror today. Why do we eat maror today? The maror of the Torah has that doesn't exist anymore. So why do we eat maror today? Our sages enacted a special mitzvah to eat maror to remember Bet HaMikdash, right? Saying Maimonides, the same way our sages enacted that we take the matzah and we dip it in the Charoset, not because Charoset is to remember the clay that our sages did in Egypt, but because our sages enacted it to remember what our forefathers were doing in the time of Bet HaMikdash. So comes down is that the argument of Maimonides and the Raavad is only whether or not they agree. They're only arguing whether or not our sages made a special enactment only for maror to be eaten today, or also for Charoset. So why does the Raavad argue on this? Why the Raavad does not agree that our sages made a special enactment to dip the matzah in the Charoset, even though the original reason is not applicable anymore? So the Rebbe explains the following. Let's see.
Rabbi's reasoning is that we only institute practices as a remembrance of the temple for central obligations that existed during the temple era, not for secondary matters. Therefore, maror, which was an independent biblical commandment during the temple period, was appropriately re-established to serve as a remembrance of the temple. However, when it comes to dipping matzah in Charoset, even during the time of the temple, this dipping was secondary.
Yeah.
This is evident from the fact that no blessing was recited over Charoset, despite it being a mitzvah, because it was secondary to maror. Similarly, Charoset has no fixed measurement, and beyond that, the Charoset must actually be shaken off the matzah so that it doesn't diminish the taste of the matzah itself. Since the practice of dipping in Charoset was only a secondary custom to begin with, Raavad maintains that there is no reason to establish a special enactment to continue dipping matzah in Charoset today as a remembrance of the temple. On the other hand, Maimonides holds that even for secondary practices, it is appropriate to establish a remembrance of the temple.
Wow. So I'll just summarize it, and then we'll see how the Rebbe summarizes it. The idea is that they don't argue. Maimonides and Raavad, they don't argue that the Charoset of the time of the temple and our Charoset is not the same. The same way that the maror, the bitter herbs in our Seder and the bitter herbs of 2,000 years ago, it's a different bitter herbs. The bitter herbs of 2,000 years ago, what it says in the Torah was to remember the bad times. The bitter herbs of our day, it's to remember the good times, to remember what our forefathers did in Bet HaMikdash. The same thing is related to the Charoset. The Rambam says, and they both agree that the Charoset of today is not to remember the clay. The only thing is that the Raavad says our sages did not enacted a special mitzvah of for today for the Charoset, since Charoset is a secondary thing. But the Rambam says, no, Charoset is a very important thing. Therefore, our sages enacted this also as a mitzvah to dip the matzah in it. But what's the conclusion out of it? Is all of our view over the Seder night. And the reason why do we eat matzah? The reason why do we eat maror? And the reason why we have charoset. An hour ago, the matzah, part of the reason why do we eat matzah was to remember the bread of affliction. The maror was to remember, the bitter herbs was to remember the bad times we had in Egypt. And the charoset was to remember the clay. Now, within 1 hour, the Rebbe changed all of our view. The matzah is only a taste of freedom. The maror is only to remember what our forefathers did in Bet HaMikdash. And the charoset, if you dip the matzah in the charoset, depend on the Ravid or the Rambam, it's only to remember what our forefathers did in Bet HaMikdash. So the shift has completely changed from a taste of exile and bad memories of the past to a view of only positivity. The Rebbe, 40 years of the Rebbe's leadership, the Rebbe never lived Crown Heights, the neighborhood where he lived in New York. Aside of 3 times that the Rebbe drove all the way to the Catskills, to upstate New York, to visit the summer camp where the kids were learning. And before the Rebbe came, so the staff, they organized all the place to look nice. They painted everything, before the Rebbe comes to see it, there was a lot of excitement. And the Rebbe, when the Rebbe came there, the Rebbe went and the Rebbe wanted to see in details all the rooms and the kitchens and the bedrooms of the kids, everything. Then they came to one room, one bungalow, which was closed. And the Rebbe asked, what is it? So they said to the Rebbe that this is where we're keeping all the tools. This is the storage for the tools. And the Rebbe said, I want to see it. So they quickly got the key. They had no choice. So they got the key. They opened the door. And obviously the place was a complete mess, upside down. And on the wall, somebody sprayed Zecher LaChurban. In Jewish houses, there's a custom to leave a portion of the wall which is not painted to remember that Bet HaMikdash is destroyed. So somebody sprayed over there with all the mess and all the upside down. Somebody sprayed on the wall Zecher LaChurban, that we are leaving this room completely there, Zecher LaChurban. So the Rebbe looks at it and the Rebbe smiled. And the Rebbe said, this is in memory of the destruction. This is in memory of Bet HaMikdash. So you do the exact same thing, but one can remember destruction and the other can remember Bet HaMikdash. And that is the essence of the Rebbe. And this is the essence of what the Rebbe is teaching us. That we can be in the same situation. 2 people can look at the same exact scenario. 2 people can be in the same exact situation. One will see destruction, and the other will remember the good days of Bet HaMikdash. And that is the point of what Leil HaSeder is. There's a lot of mess around us. The kids are spilling the wine, and I forgot to make the egg, and he forgot, and this is late, and this child is crying. There's so much balagan going on. But there is one way is to look at the mess, and the other way is to understand the order, the seder in it. And therefore, in the night of Passover, in our days, Bezrat Hashem, in a week and 2 days. We will eat bitter herbs. We will dip the bitter herbs in the charoset. We will eat matzah. But all of it will be in a vision and a remembering of the good days, in a remembering and celebrating redemption, not remembering and celebrating bad times, not remembering that our forefathers were enslaved in Egypt. That's true. That's the history part. But what do we eat? What do we remember is the good days and the good days to come, Bezrat Hashem. Let's see it. One second. Let's see how the Rebbe, in a different time, where the Rebbe explained our Seder and our times as opposed to the times of Bet HaMikdash. Source number 9. Henji, please.
The reason why during exile there's no biblical obligation to eat maror is because exile itself is maror, and there's no need to further stress the bitterness, something that can lead to despondency. During the temple era, however, there's a need to remember and contrast the redemption to the preceding exile. Nowadays, the main thing is to remember the redemption, which gives us strength to bring about the ultimate redemption from our current exile.
And based on this, also the matzah. So everything we do on the Seder it's only connected with redemption and freedom and exiting exile. Because the other part, the negative part, unfortunately, we have reality surrounding us. We have a war in Israel. We have soldiers who are wounded. We have hostages who are missing. I don't need to eat bitter herbs to remember the slavery. I have the reality around me. So everything that the Torah instituted for that day, that our sages instituted and enacted on the day of Passover, it's only redemption. We eat matzah not to remember the bread of affliction. We eat matzah to remember that God has taken us out of Egypt with haste, and God will do the same to us. And we eat bitter herbs to remember that in the time of Bet HaMikdash, everybody would eat lafa. You know what is a lafa?
Yeah.
Shawarma with lafa. And also the charoset, for those who dip the matzah in the charoset. Why do we do it? To remember that this is what our forefathers did in Bet HaMikdash. And this is how, from an argument, a small argument between two sages, Maimonides and the Raavad, we come with the help of the Ragachover, we come to this beautiful explanation and an eye-opening on the night of the Seder, but not just on the night of the Seder, but a view on everything in life. What do you choose to put your pointer at? What do you choose to see? It's the same exact situation. It's up to you to decide what do you see. Let's see inside the key point. Henji, please.
On the night of the Seder, we eat several foods. Matzah, the bread of affliction, as a reminder of the harsh servitude and the rapid redemption from Egypt. Maror, which represents the bitterness of life in Egypt. And Charoset, symbolizing the mortar with which our ancestors labored. The Rambam rules that we should dip the matzah in Charoset, but the Ravad disagrees and believes that we should not dip the matzah in Charoset. What is the disagreement about? When the temple stood, everyone agreed that the matzah should be dipped in Charoset. The reason for this is that matzah is a reminder of both servitude and redemption, making it appropriate to combine it with Charoset, which represents the servitude.
But
not mentioning the servitude. In the time of exile, the obligation to mention the servitude as part of the Seder night was nullified. Why? The Rabbi explains that during the Seder, the tradition was established to eat certain food to help us experience both the servitude our ancestors endured in Egypt and the freedom they gained during the Exodus. However, in exile today, there is no need for special actions to remind us of the servitude since we live it daily. Therefore, the part of the Seder that was meant to symbolize the remembrance of servitude is no longer necessary. This is also the reason why, according to Torah law, there is no obligation to eat maror during this time. And for this reason, when we eat matzah today, we no longer do so as a reminder of the bread of affliction, but only as a reminder of the redemption.
And the same is true, yeah.
So why did the sages decree that we continue to eat maror even in this time, to remember the days of the temple? Now we can understand the difference of opinion between the Rambam and the Raavad. According to the Raavad, in exile, there is no reason to dip the Matzah in Charoset, since Matzah in exile symbolizes only freedom, while Charoset symbolizes servitude, and there is no place to combine the two. According to the Rambam, even in exile, we should preserve the custom of dipping the Matzah in Charoset as a reminder of the days of the temple, when they dipped it in Charoset to feel servitude, similar to how the sages instituted the eating of maror even in the time of exile.
What's the takeaway?
Chassidim always prefer to emphasize remembering freedom, because when focusing on the good, it grows and illuminates the entire path.
Fantastic. Very
In the
good.
time I read a story that somebody witnessed that in the time of the Holocaust, they were 1,200 people sleeping in a bunk, and it was the Seder night. So somebody in the middle of in the evening, somebody said, "Tonight is Pesach." So everybody gathered in the center of the bunk, and they started saying each one whatever part of the Agadah that he remembered by heart. So this one remembered this part, and that one remembered that part. And they forgot where they are. So they started to become noisy. Can imagine, right? 1,200 people in a room, each one remembering one part became noisy. So one of the Nazi guards walked in, and he became very angry, obviously. So everybody rushed back to their beds, to their shelves. But as soon as he left, they all gathered together. It's Passover tonight. And again, they started. And he gathered there again. That Nazi came again, and that Nazi said, "If you won't be quiet, I will shoot all of you." But as soon as he left, everybody gathered together, and then they were already at the point where you sing Manishtana. And Manishtana, everybody remembers Manishtana, right? You don't need to be... So everybody was singing together Manishtana. And that person who said that says that among these 1,200 people, there were many who are not religious, many who call themselves unaffiliated, not... But nevertheless, when you celebrate freedom, it shows you a path of freedom. It helps you come out of all exiles. It helps you come out of all the negativity and slavery that we sometimes impose on ourselves. And this is the lesson we need to take from this argument between the Raavad and the Rambam. This is the lesson we need to take from the teaching of the Rebbe on what do we celebrate today. We celebrate today freedom. You could ask yourself, I'm not in freedom, I'm in exile. True, you're in exile. This is why you need to, it's even more important, because you are in exile, it's even more important to focus on the redemption. At the time of Bet HaMikdash, Leil HaSeder was 2. Eating matzah, every bite of the matzah was a bread of affliction and bread of redemption. But now, since we live affliction, since we live in dark times, the only thing you need to put your pointer on, the only thing you need to pay attention to is redemption. And when you choose redemption, Hashem will lead you in a way of redemption. Bezrat Hashem, all of us will be celebrating this year. We will eat matzah, and this year matzah will have two reasons. And we will eat bitter herbs this year, but these bitter herbs will be the same bitter herbs from the Torah, because this year we're going to celebrate Passover in Bet HaMikdash HaShlishi together with Mashiach Tzidkenu, and together with all the hostages, and together with all our loved ones that we lost, and together with all the 6 million that the Nazi took, and together with all the Jews from all the four corners of the world in Bet HaMikdash HaShlishi. Amen. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Chen.
God bless you.
If there are any questions, please feel free to ask. And just reminding you that if you need matzah or anything for Pesach, please reach out to me or to Chaya, and we'll do our best to get it to you, Bezrat Hashem.
That's wonderful.
Okay, let me just stop the recording.